They say a home is built not with bricks and mortar, but with trust and promises. They talk about the foundations of love, the framework of commitment, and the shelter of shared dreams. But what they don't tell you, what they never whisper in the quiet moments after the lights go out, is that sometimes the person you built that home with is the very same person holding the hammer, waiting for the perfect moment to shatter its foundation into dust. For Amelia Hayes, that moment came on a Tuesday, a day so painfully ordinary, it would forever feel like a betrayal in itself. She was sitting in the living room of her minimalist masterpiece, a home she had designed from the ground up, where every line was clean and every surface was polished, a perfect reflection of the life she thought she had. The city of San Francisco hummed a familiar tune outside her floor-to-ceiling windows, but inside, a deafening silence had fallen. On the sleek, cool screen of her laptop, a single, hidden folder was open. It was titled, innocently enough, Future Plans. It was not her folder. It belonged to her husband, David. And inside, there were no vacation itineraries or retirement strategies. Instead, there was a blueprint for the demolition of her life. Document by document, her world unraveled. There were statements from offshore bank accounts she never knew existed, systematically siphoning funds from their joint assets. There were emails, sickeningly sweet emails, between David and his assistant, Clara, filled with shared jokes and promises of a life together. But the final, crushing blow, the one that stopped the air in her lungs, was a draft for a real estate contract, a sprawling, cliffside home in Carmel, California. The buyers listed were David Miller and Clara Monroe. The shock was not hot. It was not the searing rage she might have expected. It was a cold, creeping frost that started in her fingertips and spread through her veins until her entire body felt numb. She looked around the perfect room, at the custom-built furniture and the carefully curated art, and saw it all for what it was, a stage. A beautifully constructed set for a play in which she was the unwitting fool. David's charm, his easy laughter, his mother Eleanor's condescending smiles, it all clicked into place, forming a hideous mosaic of deceit. That night, Amelia did not cry. She did not scream or break the expensive crystal glassware that lined their shelves. She simply sat there, in the dark, as the city lights began to sparkle like distant, mocking stars. The silence in that house was no longer peaceful. It was heavy. It was charged. And in that profound, chilling silence, a new kind of plan began to form. Not one born from the fire of anger, but one forged in the absolute, unforgiving ice of betrayal. To understand the depth of a betrayal, you must first appreciate the beauty of the structure it destroys. Amelia Hayes was a creator of beautiful structures. As one of San Francisco's most sought-after architects, she dealt in the language of light, space, and form. Her designs were known for their elegant simplicity, their seamless integration with the surrounding landscape, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. She believed that a building was more than just a shelter. It was a statement of intent, a physical manifestation of an idea. Her own life, she had believed, was her greatest design. She had risen from a modest, middle-class background in Sacramento, a girl who preferred graph paper to dolls, and had built herself, brick by meticulous brick, into a woman of substance and success. Her mind was her most valuable asset, a place of order and logic, where every problem had a solution, every stress point could be reinforced. She was calm, she was rational, and she believed, with the quiet confidence of a master builder, that any foundation she laid was built to last. Her marriage to David Miller was meant to be the capstone of this life. When they met, he was everything she wasn't. While she was measured, he was effusive. While she found beauty in quiet contemplation, he thrived in the spotlight. David was a wealth manager, a scion of an old-money East Coast family, and he wore his privilege as effortlessly as he wore his tailored suits. He had a charisma that could disarm the most cynical investor, and a smile that seemed to promise endless sunshine. To Amelia, he was the missing piece of her blueprint, the vibrant, unpredictable element that brought her orderly world to life. She fell in love with his stories, his ambition, and the way he made her feel seen, not just for her talent, but for the woman she was. She saw their union as a perfect partnership. two successful, driven people building an empire together. The magnificent glass and steel house overlooking the bay was their testament, a project they had collaborated on, a home she had poured her very soul into. She thought its foundations were solid, anchored in mutual respect and love. She was wrong. The foundation was riddled with cracks, masked by the beautiful, deceptive facade of their life. David Miller played the part of the devoted husband with an actor's skill. In public, he was her biggest champion, always praising her work at the glitzy fundraisers and gallery openings they frequented. He would wrap an arm around her, call her his brilliant wife, and people would sigh, calling them the perfect couple. But in the architecture of their marriage, David was the source of a slow, corrosive decay. His world was not one of tangible creation, but of abstract numbers and shifting loyalties. He managed the fortunes of the city's elite, a job that required a fluid relationship with the truth. He saw life not as a structure to be built, but as a game to be won, and people were merely assets or liabilities. Amelia, with her unwavering principles and her belief in honesty, was an asset that had matured, one he was now planning to liquidate for a more favorable investment. He loved her success, but he did not respect the integrity that created it. He saw her achievements as extensions of his own, glittering additions to the Miller family portfolio. And then there was Eleanor Miller, the matriarch who held the deed to David's soul. Eleanor was a woman carved from glacial ice, her politeness a thin veneer over a core of ruthless condescension. From the moment David introduced Amelia, Eleanor saw her not as a daughter-in-law, but as a temporary custodian of the Miller name. She viewed Amelia's self-made success with a kind of bemused contempt, as if it were a charming but ultimately common hobby. Her compliments were always double-edged swords. "It's so wonderful that you have a career to keep you busy, dear," she would say, her tone implying that Amelia's work was a mere distraction from her true duty of serving David. She spoke of the Miller lineage as if it were a royal bloodline, constantly contrasting it with Amelia's humble origins. In her eyes, Amelia was an outsider who had been granted a temporary visa into their world of inherited privilege, a visa that could be revoked at any time. Eleanor adored her son with a blinding, possessive love that saw no flaws, only perfection. In her narrative, David was a king, and any woman who failed him was not just inadequate, she was a traitor to the throne. This fierce, almost pathological loyalty made her the perfect accomplice, the silent partner in her son's long and carefully planned deception, ensuring the family's assets and its reputation remained untarnished. Like the slow, creeping stress fractures that appear in a building's foundation long before the collapse, the cracks in Amelia's marriage began as almost imperceptible fissures. At first, she dismissed them, attributing the changes in David to the pressures of his work. There were the phone calls, once taken freely in her presence, that were now answered with a hurried, "Let me call you back," as he walked into another room, closing the door softly behind him. His phone, which used to lie face up on the kitchen counter, was now perpetually face down, a small, dark monolith guarding its secrets. The late nights at the office became more frequent, his explanations for them delivered with a polished, almost rehearsed smoothness that felt slick to the touch. He would come home smelling not of another person's perfume, for David was far too meticulous for such a clumsy mistake, but of a sterile, generic office scent that seemed just as artificial as his excuses. The emotional distance was a more subtle, corrosive force. He was still physically present, a handsome fixture at her side during social events, but his attention was elsewhere. She would be in the middle of describing a breakthrough in a new design, her eyes alive with passion, only to notice his gaze was distant, his smile a well-practiced mask that didn't quite reach his eyes. The easy intimacy they had once shared, the shorthand language of a long-term couple, was replaced by a stilted formality, as if they were business partners navigating a polite but joyless merger. The decay was insidious, a slow poisoning of the atmosphere in their beautiful, sterile home. Eleanor Miller, of course, was the catalyst, gleefully watering the seeds of discord with her carefully chosen words. Her praise for Clara, David's young and adoring assistant, became a constant, grating refrain at every family gathering. "That girl is a lifesaver." Eleanor would proclaim over Sunday brunch, her voice carrying across the table. David was saying just the other day, he doesn't know what he'd do without her. She anticipates his every need. Each compliment was a carefully aimed dart meant to undermine Amelia, to highlight her perceived inadequacies as a wife. Eleanor would paint a picture of Clara as this tireless, devoted saint, while Amelia, with her demanding career and independent mind, was implicitly cast as the neglectful, self-absorbed spouse. Amelia saw the tactic for what it was, a classic divide-and-conquer strategy, but knowing it didn't make the poison any less effective. It created a narrative, a permission structure in the air, that legitimized David's growing closeness with his assistant. The true collapse, however, did not come with a dramatic confrontation, but in the sterile silence of a Thursday afternoon. Rain was streaking down the vast panes of glass in her home office, blurring the world outside into a watercolor wash of gray. Amelia was searching for a digital copy of a 5-year-old tax return, a mundane task on a dreary day. She was navigating the labyrinthine folders on their shared server, a digital space she had meticulously organized years ago. Her mind, trained to see patterns and anomalies, noticed a folder that felt out of place. It was not in the finance or household directories. It was buried several layers deep within a folder labeled Old Projects, a digital graveyard for abandoned ideas. The folder's name was Future Plans. A faint tremor of unease, cold and sharp, went through her. It was a premonition, the primal instinct of an animal sensing a predator in the shadows. Her hand hovered over the trackpad. For a moment, she considered closing the window, walking away, and clinging to the fragile beauty of her ignorance. But Amelia was a builder, a creator. It was not in her nature to ignore a flaw in the foundation. She had to know its depth, its danger. She took a breath, and she clicked. The contents of the folder did not just confirm her fears. They took a sledgehammer to the entire structure of her reality. It opened not like a folder, but like a Pandora's box of calculated cruelty. The first documents she opened were email threads between David and Clara. The words on the screen blurred as she read. They were intimate, filled with private jokes and shared dreams. They had nicknames for her, the Ice Queen, the Architect, and they wrote about their future with a certainty that stole the air from Amelia's lungs. They talked about the day they could finally be together, once the dead weight is cut loose. Her heart pounding, she clicked on another subfolder, this one labeled Financial Restructuring. It was a meticulously organized collection of spreadsheets, bank statements, and legal documents. She saw the names of shell corporations in Panama and limited liability companies in Delaware. She saw statements from accounts in the Cayman Islands, showing balances with strings of numbers so long they looked like telephone numbers. Millions. Money that had been systematically siphoned from their shared accounts, from David's investment funds, from the very portfolio she had trusted him with. It was a masterclass in financial treachery, a premeditated campaign to leave her with nothing but the hollow shell of their shared life. Then, she saw the file containing their prenuptial agreement. It was the same document she had signed years ago, in good faith, believing it was a fair protection for them both. But this version was different. It was covered in digital notes, comments from David's lawyer outlining a strategy for its enforcement, highlighting the clauses that would dispossess her of any claim to his family's wealth and even her own future earnings. The document was no longer a shield. It was a weapon, sharpened and aimed directly at her heart for years. The final, most visceral blow was a file simply named Carmel. Inside was a complete portfolio for the purchase of a cliffside estate. There were architectural drawings, interior design mood boards filled with styles Clara liked, and a signed purchase offer. Amelia, an architect, stared at the blueprints of the life her husband was building with another woman. She saw the layout of their master bedroom, the grand kitchen where Clara would entertain, the infinity pool where they would watch the sunset. It was the most profound and personal insult imaginable, a violation not just of her marriage, but of her very identity. The world narrowed to the glowing screen. The rain beating against the window faded away. All she could hear was the frantic, panicked rhythm of her own heart. The betrayal was complete. It wasn't a simple act of infidelity. It was a conspiracy, a cold, calculated, long-term plan to erase her. She slowly, deliberately closed the laptop. The screen went dark, and in its black, reflective surface, she saw her own face, pale and still. The face of a woman who had just discovered she was living in a house of cards. And in that moment, the victim died, and the architect of a new, more terrible design was born. There is a moment after a catastrophic impact, a breath of suspended time between the blinding flash of light and the deafening roar of the explosion. In that moment, the world is silent. For Amelia, this silence stretched for hours after she closed the laptop. The storm of grief and rage she expected to feel did not arrive. In its place was a profound, unnatural calm, the kind of stillness that precedes a historic earthquake. To scream, to cry, to throw the damning evidence in David's handsome, lying face would have been a release. It would have been human. But Amelia's humanity had been fractured, and the architect, the strategist, the woman who understood that the success of any structure lies in the planning, had taken control. She realized, with a clarity that was both terrifying and empowering, that a premature confrontation was exactly what David and his conspirators would expect from an emotional, betrayed wife. It would grant him the moral high ground in the eyes of their friends, allow him to paint her as unstable, and give him the precious time he needed to hide his tracks and execute the final stages of his plan. Her pain was a liability. Her knowledge was a weapon. And weapons are most effective when the enemy doesn't know you have them. So she made a decision. A cold, hard, diamond-like decision in the core of her being. She would play her part. She would become the greatest actress of her generation. And the stage would be her own life. That evening, when she heard David's key in the lock, she did not flinch. She had spent the last 2 hours meticulously erasing her digital footprints from the server and composing her face into a mask of placid normality. He walked in, smiling that easy $1,000,000 smile, and dropped a kiss on her cheek. It felt like the touch of a spider, and it took every ounce of her will not to recoil. "Tough day, honey?" he asked, loosening his tie. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, she saw him not as her husband, but as a specimen to be studied. She saw the minute flicker in his eyes as he assessed her mood, the practiced ease of his posture, the calculated affection in his touch. "The usual," she replied, her voice even and smooth. "A new client is being difficult about zoning permits. Nothing I can't handle." And so began her life in the shadow play. Their beautiful house, her sanctuary, transformed overnight into a hunting ground, a theater of observation. Every conversation became an interrogation disguised as casual chatter. "How was your day?" was no longer an expression of care, but a request for intelligence. "Who was that on the phone?" was not jealousy, but a data point to be logged. She watched the way he angled his phone away from her, the way he would suddenly clear his browser history, the almost imperceptible hesitation before he answered a question about his whereabouts. She logged it all away in the cold, organized archives of her mind. She performed the role of the loving wife flawlessly. She hosted dinner parties, smiling graciously at their guests, while her mind cataloged every interaction between David and his allies. She listened to him talk about his business triumphs, feigning pride, while she was mentally cross-referencing his stories with the fraudulent documents she had found. Her interactions with Eleanor became a masterclass in psychological warfare. A week after her discovery, Eleanor called, her voice dripping with false concern. "Amelia, dear," she began, "I do hope you're making sure David is resting. He's been working so terribly hard. Thank heavens for that girl, Clara. She told me she managed to secure that last-minute meeting with the Henderson Fund. She really is a miracle worker." In the past, a comment like that would have stung, a subtle jab at her own perceived lack of support. Now, Amelia heard it for what it was, a co-conspirator checking the status of their operation. She saw Eleanor's words not as insults, but as intel. "You're absolutely right, Eleanor," Amelia responded, her voice a perfect blend of warmth and sincerity. "Clara is indispensable. David and I are so lucky to have her. We should have her over for dinner soon, to thank her properly." There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause on the other end of the line. Amelia had just returned the serve with a volley her opponent had not expected. She had embraced their narrative, and in doing so, had made herself appear even more naive, more blissfully ignorant than they could have possibly hoped. She was no longer a wife. She was a ghost in her own home, a silent witness to the plot against her. The pain of the betrayal had not vanished. It was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of her calm facade, a radioactive core fueling her resolve. At night, she would lie beside the man who was actively planning her ruin, matching her breathing to his, and she would feel nothing but a chilling sense of purpose. Her love had been a grand, beautiful design, and he had marked it for demolition. He saw her as an obstacle to be removed. He and his mother had made a fatal error in calculation. They had mistaken her quiet strength for weakness, her trust for blindness. They had designed a perfect, airtight plan to destroy a woman they did not know. Amelia, the architect, would now deconstruct their lives with the same precision and ruthless attention to detail she applied to her work. She would not be the victim in their story. She would be the architect of their downfall, and she would wait, patiently, for the perfect moment to present her new design. The act of living a lie is a slow and steady drain on the soul. For weeks, Amelia existed in a state of suspended animation, a ghost haunting the corridors of her own life. The icy resolve that had fortified her in the initial days of her discovery began to show hairline fractures under the immense, constant pressure of her performance. There were moments, late at night in the sterile quiet of her office, surrounded by the tangible proof of her own success, when the sheer scale of David's conspiracy threatened to drown her. She would spread the copied documents across her drafting table, the offshore accounts, the venomous emails, the blueprints for another woman's life, and a wave of profound isolation would wash over her. She was one woman against the Miller dynasty, a family with generations of experience in hiding secrets and crushing opposition. They had the best lawyers money could buy, a network of powerful friends, and a complete lack of morality. The weight of it all was suffocating. How could she possibly fight them and win? It was in one of these moments of near despair, staring at an old photograph on her digital picture frame, that a memory surfaced from the deep. The photo was from a charity gala early in their marriage. She and David were smiling, champagne flutes in hand, the picture of happiness. But Amelia's mind was not on the image, but on a conversation from that night. David had been holding court with a small group of friends, and fueled by expensive scotch, he had begun talking about his first marriage. The words came back to her now, with a horrifying new clarity. "My ex-wife, Isabella," he had said with a dismissive, charming laugh. She was a beautiful woman, but completely unhinged, an absolute basket case by the end. Amelia remembered Eleanor, who had been standing nearby, gliding into the conversation to add her own venomous footnotes. "Unhinged is too kind a word, darling," Eleanor had chimed in, her voice like the tinkle of poisoned ice in a glass. The woman was vindictive, hysterical. During the divorce, her demands were simply deranged. She accused David of the most ludicrous things. It was a terribly sad display of instability. At the time, Amelia had felt a pang of sympathy for David, for this ordeal he had supposedly endured. She had accepted their version of the story without question, because she was in love, and the woman they described was a convenient villain, a cautionary tale that made her own relationship with David feel safe and secure. But now, sitting in the cold glow of her computer screen, those words echoed with a completely different meaning. Unhinged, hysterical, vindictive, unstable. These were not descriptions. They were weapons. They were the labels slapped onto a woman who refused to go away quietly. They were the words used to discredit a voice that was trying to speak the truth. A question, sharp and incisive, cut through Amelia's despair. What would make a woman hysterical? Perhaps it was discovering that the man she had built a life with was a pathological liar and a thief. What would make her vindictive? Perhaps it was the desperate, burning need for justice against a man who was trying to ruin her. What would make her unstable? Perhaps it was having the very foundation of her reality systematically dismantled by a conspiracy of two, a narcissistic husband and his venomous mother. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't just thinking about Isabella Rossi anymore. She was seeing a ghost of her own future. The story the Millers told about Isabella wasn't a history. It was a playbook. It was the same narrative they were undoubtedly preparing to spin about her. In that moment, Isabella ceased to be a vague, pathetic figure from David's past. She became real. She was the first victim. She was the woman who had walked this same treacherous path and had tried to sound the alarm, only to have her credibility torched by the Miller PR machine. A frantic, electrifying energy surged through Amelia, chasing away the fog of despair. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, typing the name Isabella Rossi into the search bar. She half expected to find nothing, or perhaps a private social media profile for a woman who had retreated from the world. The first result that appeared on the screen made her heart stop. It was not a social media profile. It was the homepage for one of the most respected and feared boutique law firms in the city. The firm's name was emblazoned in stark, elegant letters across the top of the page, Rossi and Associates. And beneath it, a tagline that felt like a personal promise, Justice Reclaimed. Amelia clicked the link. The website was sleek, professional, and radiated an aura of expensive, lethal competence. On the About Us page was a photograph of Isabella Rossi. The woman in the picture was nothing like the basket case David had described. This woman was poised, her dark hair cut in a sharp, professional style. She wore a tailored suit, and her expression was one of cool, intelligent confidence. But it was her eyes that held Amelia captive. There was no trace of hysteria in them. Instead, there was fire. It was the look of a survivor, of a person who had walked through hell and had memorized the layout of the place. Amelia read Isabella's biography. After her divorce, Isabella had left her career in corporate law and gone back to school, earning a specialized degree in financial forensics. Her firm dealt exclusively in high-asset, high-conflict divorces, with a particular focus on uncovering hidden assets and financial fraud. She was a legend in legal circles, a shark who took on the city's most powerful men and systematically dismantled their financial empires on behalf of the wives they had wronged. It all clicked into place with the force of a tectonic shift. Isabella hadn't been destroyed by David Miller. He had unwittingly forged her into the ultimate weapon against men exactly like him. Her pain had not broken her. It had given her a purpose. She had built a fortress and a career out of the rubble of her first marriage. The isolation that had crippled Amelia only moments before was replaced by a dangerous, brilliant hope. This was a move no one could have predicted. David and Eleanor were so confident in their narrative, so sure they had destroyed Isabella's reputation, that they would never conceive of an alliance between the ex-wife and the current one. It was a colossal blind spot in their otherwise meticulous plan. Reaching out to Isabella was a terrifying gamble. She might see Amelia as the woman who naively took her place, who lived in the house she might have shared with David, who believed the lies she had tried so hard to expose. She might hang up the phone. But as Amelia stared at the powerful, unyielding face of Isabella Rossi on the screen, she knew it was the only move she had left. This was not about hiring just any lawyer. This was about retaining the only other person in the world who knew the enemy's playbook by heart. With a hand that was now perfectly steady, Amelia picked up her phone. She was not just seeking legal counsel. She was seeking an ally. The phone call to Isabella Rossi's office was the most difficult one Amelia had ever made. It was one thing to have a brilliant, dangerous idea in the dead of night. It was another entirely to act upon it in the cold light of day. Her voice, when she spoke to the crisp, efficient paralegal, was steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. She gave her name Amelia Hayes, her professional name, a small piece of armor. She didn't say she was David Miller's wife. She simply said she needed to schedule a consultation with Miss Rossi regarding a complex marital asset dispute. The appointment was set for 2 days later. 2 days in which Amelia continued her charade at home, each smile to David feeling like a betrayal of the formidable woman she was about to meet. Isabella Rossi's office was on the 40th floor of a gleaming skyscraper in the financial district, a steel and glass testament to power and commerce. The space itself was a reflection of the woman Amelia had seen online, minimalist, impeccably designed, and radiating an aura of untouchable control. There were no family photos, no clutter, just clean lines, modern art, and a vast, panoramic window that looked down on the rest of the city as if from Olympus. It was a space designed to intimidate, to establish dominance before a single word was spoken. Amelia sat in a severe but beautiful leather chair, her portfolio resting on her lap, and waited. She felt like a supplicant at the gates of a fortress, and in a way, she was. The door opened, and Isabella Rossi walked in. She was even more striking in person. She was tall and slender, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that was both feminine and severe. Her movements were economical and precise, and her eyes, the same fiery, intelligent eyes from the photograph, swept over Amelia with a cool, assessing gaze that missed nothing. She did not offer a hand. "Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice calm and low. The use of David's name was the first shot fired, a subtle but clear signal that she knew exactly who Amelia was. "Thank you for coming in. Please, have a seat." Amelia's carefully rehearsed opening speech evaporated. The air in the room was thick with unspoken history, with the ghosts of a shared husband and a decade of lies. Isabella sat behind a large, imposing desk of polished chrome and dark wood, her hands folded neatly on its surface. She was a queen on her throne, and Amelia was a visitor from a land she had long since escaped. "My paralegal said your matter was urgent," Isabella began, her tone all business. "My time is limited. Tell me why you're here." Taking a deep breath, Amelia made a critical decision. She would not appeal to sympathy. She would not present herself as a heartbroken wife. She would appeal to the professional, the strategist, the woman of logic she sensed Isabella to be. She was an architect presenting a structural problem. "I'm not here for a typical divorce consultation, Miss Rossi," Amelia began, her own voice finding its steady professional register. "I'm here because I believe my husband, David Miller, is engaged in a long-term, systematic campaign of financial fraud against me, and I believe you are the only person in this city who understands his specific methodology." A flicker of something interest, perhaps, or just professional curiosity passed through Isabella's guarded expression. Without another word, Amelia opened her portfolio. It was not a chaotic jumble of papers, but a curated, organized presentation. She laid out copies of the key documents on the polished desk: the statement from the Cayman Islands account, the email thread with Clara discussing their future home, the annotated prenuptial agreement, and finally, the architectural plans for the house in Carmel. She explained her discovery calmly and chronologically, detailing the facts without emotion, as if she were presenting a case study to a client. Isabella listened in absolute silence, her eyes moving from the documents back to Amelia's face. Her expression remained unreadable, a perfect mask of neutrality. But as Amelia detailed the web of shell corporations and the methods David used to siphon money, she saw a subtle tightening around Isabella's jaw. The playbook was not just familiar, it was identical. When Amelia finished, a long silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of the city below. Finally, Isabella spoke, her voice still low, but now edged with steel. "His mother, Eleanor, is she involved?" "I believe she's the co-architect of the entire plan," Amelia said. "I have a copy of an email in which she advises him on how to structure his assets to shield them from me." Isabella leaned back in her chair, a slow, deliberate movement. For the first time, a trace of an expression crossed her face, a cold, mirthless smile. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated recognition. "Of course she is," she murmured, almost to herself. The dragon guarding her hoard, she looked directly at Amelia, her gaze sharp enough to cut glass. "They used to talk about you, didn't they? When you first started dating him. They told you I was unstable. They called me crazy. This was the moment, the final test. They used the word hysterical," Amelia replied, her voice unwavering. Isabella's smile widened slightly. "Hysterical," she repeated, tasting the word. "That's the word they use for a woman who starts looking at the bank statements. It's the word they use for a woman who asks the right questions." The wall between them did not just crack, it vaporized. In that moment, they were not the ex-wife and the new wife. They were two engineers staring at the same faulty blueprint, two survivors who had navigated the same minefield. Isabella leaned forward, all pretense of professional detachment gone, replaced by a focused, predatory intensity. You did the right thing by not confronting him. You did the smart thing by coming to me. But you need to understand, if I take this case, this will not be a quiet, dignified settlement. They don't deal in dignity. They deal in scorched earth tactics. They will try to ruin your reputation, question your sanity, and bury you in legal paperwork until you beg to walk away with nothing. Are you prepared for that? I'm an architect, Amelia said simply. I know how to handle a demolition. The answer seemed to satisfy Isabella. A new energy filled the room, the thrilling, dangerous hum of a partnership being forged in the fires of a common cause. Good, Isabella said, a definitive, final-sounding word. Because we are not going to file for a simple divorce, Mrs. Miller. We are going to launch a full-scale forensic investigation into every corner of David Miller's life and his mother's finances. We will subpoena every record, trace every dollar, and expose every lie. They built their house on a foundation of fraud. We are going to tear it down, brick by brick, until nothing is left but the truth. She rose from her chair and, for the first time, extended her hand across the desk. When Amelia took it, the handshake was firm, cool, and resolute. It was not a handshake of comfort or sympathy. It was the sealing of a contract. It was the beginning of a war. The signing of the retainer agreement was not an end, but a beginning. It was the formal declaration of a war that had, until now, been waged only in the shadows. Isabella's conference room, a space of cool, impersonal glass and chrome, became their command center. The days of Amelia's solitary, fearful observation were over. She was now part of a two-woman army, and the nature of her life changed entirely. She continued the charade at home, a performance that grew more difficult and more draining with each passing day. But her real life was lived in these late-night strategy sessions, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a cold, burning hunger for justice. The bond that formed between the two women was not forged in shared tears or comforting words, but in the sterile glow of computer screens and the meticulous cross-referencing of financial documents. It was a bond of mutual respect, a shared intellectual rigor, and an identical, intimate understanding of their common enemy. In their first official strategy session, Isabella stood before a large whiteboard, a marker in her hand. She did not start with the evidence Amelia had brought. She started with the man himself. To defeat an enemy, she began, her voice as calm and precise as a surgeon's scalpel, you must not only understand his strategy, but you must anticipate it. David has a playbook. He used it on me, and he is using it on you. Knowing it is our greatest advantage. She began to write on the board, outlining the phases of the coming conflict as if she were sketching a battle plan. Phase 1, which will begin the moment he is served with the divorce papers, is the charm offensive. He will not react with anger. He will feign shock, devastation, and profound hurt. He will tell you this is a terrible misunderstanding, that you are the love of his life, that you can work this out. He will try to appeal to the woman who loved him, the woman he believes still exists. His goal is not reconciliation, it is control. He wants to stop our legal momentum before it begins. Amelia listened, a chill running down her spine. It was exactly what she would have expected from the David she once knew. What happens when that fails? She asked. Phase 2, Isabella continued, drawing a box around her first point. The character assassination. This is where Eleanor becomes his primary weapon. Once he realizes you cannot be emotionally manipulated, they will pivot. They will launch a whisper campaign. They will tell your friends that you are overworked, paranoid, having a breakdown. They will create a narrative of instability to discredit you before you can ever present your evidence. Every public display of emotion will be used as proof of your hysteria. Isabella paused, her eyes meeting Amelia's. This will be the hardest part. You will be completely isolated, and you must show them nothing. Your public face must be one of serene, untroubled calm. The Ice Queen they mock you as? You will become her. And Phase 3? Amelia asked, her voice steady. The legal war of attrition, Isabella said, underlining the words with a sharp, aggressive stroke. His lawyers will be instructed to bury us. They will file frivolous motions, contest every request, delay every deposition, and drown us in paperwork. They will try to exhaust you emotionally and, more importantly, financially, until you are so broken that you'll agree to walk away with whatever crumbs they offer. This is how he beat me. I was young, I was emotionally shattered, and I ran out of money. You will not. It was a terrifyingly accurate prophecy, a glimpse into the brutal months that lay ahead. But instead of fear, Amelia felt a strange sense of empowerment. The enemy's plan was no longer a mystery. It was a blueprint. And as an architect, Amelia knew exactly what to do with a blueprint: analyze it, identify its weaknesses, and design a better, stronger structure to defeat it. Her role in the partnership quickly evolved beyond that of a mere client. While Isabella marshaled the legal forces, Amelia applied her unique skill set to the mountain of data. She spent hours poring over the bank statements and corporate filings, her mind trained to see patterns in complex designs, identifying anomalies that a lawyer might miss. "Look here," she said one night, pointing to a series of wire transfers from one of David's shell corporations. "They're all different amounts, to different holding companies, but they all happen on the third Friday of the month, right after the market closes. It's a pattern." He's methodical. Using her expertise in real estate and construction, she dug into the obscure LLCs David had used to purchase property. One company, registered in Nevada, had made a large payment to a high-end architectural firm in Miami. It was listed as a consulting fee. To a lawyer, it was a dead end. To Amelia, it was a flashing red light. She knew the firm. They specialized in luxury condominium developments. A few phone calls to old colleagues and a deep dive into Miami-Dade property records later, she found it. A magnificent penthouse apartment purchased 2 years prior by the Nevada LLC, its ownership completely shielded from public view. It was another hidden asset, another brick in the wall of his deceit that she had just loosened. They brought in the best forensic accountant in the business, a grizzled, no-nonsense man named Marcus Thorne, an ex-FBI agent who had a bloodhound's instinct for hidden money. During their first meeting, Marcus watched as Amelia sketched out a complex diagram on the whiteboard, not with names and dates, but with boxes and arrows, illustrating the flow of money from David's legitimate businesses to the offshore accounts. She wasn't just listing facts. She was revealing the underlying structure of the fraud. Marcus, a man not easily impressed, turned to Isabella. "She's not a client," he grunted, a rare compliment. "She's an analyst." In those long nights, surrounded by the architecture of her husband's betrayal, a quiet camaraderie grew. It was in the shared glance across a table, littered with evidence, in the silent offering of a fresh cup of coffee at 2 a.m., in the mutual appreciation of a well-executed plan. One evening, staring at the whiteboard, which was now a dizzying web of lies connecting David, Eleanor, and Clara, Amelia felt a wave of exhaustion. "Did you ever think," she asked softly, "that he could be capable of something this elaborate?" Isabella looked up from her computer, her face weary but her eyes sharp. "He always saw life as a game of chess," she said, "and people, especially the women who loved him, were just pawns to be sacrificed. He always underestimated his pawns. That's the fatal flaw in his design." Amelia nodded, a slow, grim understanding passing between them. The case was being built. The team was assembled. The strategy was set. They were no longer just reacting to David's plan. They were building a cage, a perfectly designed, inescapable legal structure, ready for the moment they decided to spring the trap. With the battle plan drawn and the command structure in place, the operation moved into a new, more dangerous phase: active intelligence gathering. While Amelia maintained her chillingly perfect performance at home, Isabella and Marcus Thorne began to dig. Marcus was a man who moved through the world with a quiet, almost invisible tread. A former FBI agent from the white-collar crime division, he had a poet's appreciation for the ugly truths that hid within the neat columns of a spreadsheet. He operated out of a nondescript office that smelled of stale coffee and righteous cynicism, and he approached the task of dismantling David Miller's life with the dispassionate focus of a master craftsman. His job was to find the tangible, undeniable proof that would turn their legal strategy into an unbreakable weapon. The first front in this war was Clara Monroe. She was more than just the other woman. She was a linchpin in David's scheme, and they needed to understand her role completely. Marcus's surveillance was a study in mundane, damning detail. He provided Amelia and Isabella with a file containing photographs of David and Clara meeting, not in seedy motels, but in Michelin-starred restaurants, holding hands across the table like a carefree, legitimate couple. He documented their weekend trips to Napa, their visits to the Carmel property to oversee renovations, their entire secret life lived brazenly in plain sight. But the most crucial evidence was financial. Marcus uncovered the lease agreement for Clara's luxury apartment in Pacific Heights, an apartment whose rent was being paid directly from a corporate account belonging to a Miller Holdings subsidiary, disguised as marketing expenses. He found the registration for the brand new Tesla she drove, also purchased by a shell corporation David controlled. David wasn't just having an affair. He was using embezzled funds to finance it. He had made his mistress a co-conspirator, whether she knew it or not. As Amelia stared at the photographs, at the evidence of this vibrant, happy life David had built for his other woman, she felt a strange detachment. The initial, searing pain of the personal betrayal had cooled into something harder. This was no longer just about her broken heart. It was about a clear pattern of criminal behavior. "He's arrogant," Isabella observed, studying a photo of David kissing Clara on a sun-drenched street. "He thinks the rules don't apply to him. He's left a trail of breadcrumbs a mile wide because he never believed anyone would have the courage to follow it." The second front was David's business itself. Miller Holdings was presented to the world as a bastion of savvy conservative investment, a safe harbor for the old money of San Francisco. Marcus, using a network of contacts cultivated over a 30-year career, began to search for cracks in that facade. He found one in the form of a young, disgruntled financial analyst who had been fired from David's firm a year earlier. The official reason was poor performance. The real reason, the young man told Marcus in a hushed, nervous meeting at a noisy bar, was that he had started asking questions about a set of managed accounts that showed impossibly consistent returns, regardless of market conditions. After some persuasion and a promise of legal protection from Isabella, the analyst provided them with a flash drive. On it were internal documents he had copied before he was fired. They were the smoking gun. The documents showed, in irrefutable detail, how David had created a series of ghost client accounts. He would execute profitable trades, allocate a disproportionate amount of the gains to these secret accounts, and then distribute the much smaller, sometimes negative, returns to his legitimate clients. He was not a financial genius. He was a parasite, skimming millions of dollars from the very people who had entrusted him with their fortunes. "This," Isabella said, her voice low with a kind of awed fury as she scrolled through the files. "This is not just leverage for a divorce. This is a one-way ticket to a federal penitentiary." The scope of their case had just expanded exponentially. David wasn't just a cheating husband, he was a predator on a grand scale. The final and most crucial front was Eleanor Miller. They had the email Amelia had found, a powerful piece of evidence, but Isabella wanted more. She wanted to prove a long-standing pattern of complicity. She tasked Marcus with digging into Eleanor's entire financial history, a task akin to an archaeological excavation of a buried city. Marcus went to work, and what he found was damning. He uncovered records of a lawsuit filed against David a decade earlier, when he had just started his career. A former business partner had accused him of fraud. The case never went to court. It was quietly and very expensively settled, and the settlement funds, Marcus discovered, had not come from David, but had been funneled from an obscure Miller family trust, a trust controlled by a single trustee, Eleanor. She had been cleaning up her son's messes, enabling his corruption, for years. She was not a passive bystander. She was the chief architect of the Miller family's criminal enterprise, the one who financed the cover-ups and protected the brand at all costs. The email Amelia found was no longer a single act of malice. It was the latest chapter in a long and sordid history of conspiracy. The final piece of evidence Marcus presented was a copy of that email, printed out and placed in a folder labeled The Queen. He highlighted the most damning sentence, in which Eleanor advised her son, "You must be ruthless, David. The family's legacy must be protected from the grasping hands of a woman who was never truly one of us." Hablu. Amelia, Isabella, and Marcus stood in the conference room, the fruits of their investigation laid out before them. The Clara file, the Miller Holdings file, the Queen file. It was a mountain of evidence, a comprehensive indictment of a family rotten to its core. Any lingering wisp of sentimentality Amelia might have had for the man she married had been burned away, replaced by the cold, hard certainty of her mission. This was no longer just about her. It was about justice for the clients David had defrauded, for the partners he had betrayed, and for Isabella, the first victim in his long campaign of destruction. Isabella picked up a single sheet of paper from the table. It was the formal petition for divorce. "He thinks this is a negotiation," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with a terrible finality. "He thinks he's going to bully a heartbroken wife into a settlement. He has no idea that we are about to become the single greatest threat his family has ever faced." She looked at Amelia, a look of profound, shared purpose in her eyes. "It's time. Let the games begin." The first shot in the war was not fired in a courtroom, but in the hushed, cathedral-like quiet of David Miller's office. It was a Tuesday morning, and David was leading a strategy meeting with his top analysts, his voice a smooth, confident hum of authority. He was in his element, the king in his castle of commerce. The arrival of a nondescript man in a courier's uniform barely registered until the man placed a thick, formal envelope directly in front of him on the polished mahogany table and said, in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "David Miller, you have been served." The room fell silent. David's smooth presentation faltered. In front of his subordinates, and in the clear line of sight of Clara, who watched from the glass-walled entryway of his office, the public facade of David Miller, the untouchable master of the universe, cracked. His reaction, when he finally called Amelia that evening, was a masterful performance, delivered precisely according to Isabella's script. The charm offensive began. His voice was not angry, but thick with a wounded, bewildered sadness. "Amelia, honey, what is this?" he asked, his tone a perfect blend of confusion and concern. "I just got these papers. There has to be a mistake. This isn't us. Whatever is wrong, we can talk through it. Please, just talk to me." He was appealing to their shared history, to the woman he had married, the reasonable, logical woman he believed he could still manipulate. He was met with a wall of ice. "There is nothing to talk about, David." Amelia's voice was flat, devoid of the emotion he was trying to mine. "I have retained counsel. Please direct any and all future communications to her." Before he could respond, she ended the call. The click of the disconnected line was as final and as shocking as a slap in the face. The first official legal meeting took place a week later in a neutral, soulless conference room in a downtown law building. The room was an exercise in corporate anonymity, with a long, polished table that reflected the grim faces around it, uncomfortable leather chairs, and a single, untouched carafe of ice water that seemed to sweat in the tense atmosphere. It was a battlefield, and everyone had come dressed for their role. David was the picture of aggrieved dignity, dressed in a somber suit, his expression one of patient sorrow, as if he were tolerating the whims of a confused, unwell spouse. His lawyer, Arthur Vance, was a portly man in his 60s with a booming voice and an air of absolute self-assurance that came from a lifetime of representing the interests of old money. He was a bulldog, hired to intimidate and overwhelm. On the other side of the table, Isabella Rossi was a study in lethal calm. She was dressed in a sharp, dark navy suit, her posture perfect, her focus absolute. She radiated a dangerous stillness. And beside her sat Amelia. She had chosen her attire as if it were armor. A severe, impeccably tailored black dress, her hair pulled back tightly, her face a mask of serene neutrality. She did not look at David. Her gaze was fixed on a point on the far wall, her presence a silent, powerful counterpoint to David's theatrical display of emotion. Arthur Vance began, his voice filling the room with patronizing authority. "Well," he boomed, gesturing vaguely between them. "Let's hope we can resolve this matter quickly and amicably. A public dispute serves no one's interests, certainly not the Miller family's reputation, nor yours, Amelia." He slid a thin folder across the table. "With that in mind, the Miller family is prepared to be generous. We are offering a settlement that honors the spirit of the prenuptial agreement with an additional lump sum to assist in your transition." The offer was exactly what they had expected, an insult. It was the pittance dictated by the prenup, plus a sum that, to the Millers, was the equivalent of pocket change. It was a power play, a clear message that they considered her a nuisance to be paid off. Isabella glanced at the single sheet of paper inside the folder for no more than a second before gently pushing it back to the center of the table. The dismissive gesture was more powerful than any angry outburst. "We reject your offer, Arthur," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable weight. Vance chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "On what grounds, Isabella? The prenup is ironclad. We both know it." "Our position," Isabella stated, her eyes locked on Vance, ignoring David completely, "is that the prenuptial agreement signed by our clients is invalid and therefore entirely unenforceable." A flicker of annoyance crossed Vance's face. David scoffed audibly. "That's absurd," Vance said. "It was drafted by the best attorneys in the state. There are no grounds." "On the contrary," Isabella said, her calm unwavering. "There is the very clear ground of fraudulent inducement through material non-disclosure." She reached into her own briefcase and pulled out a single, slim file, sliding it across the table with the same deliberate motion Vance had used. "I believe you'll find this of interest." Vance opened the folder. Inside was a single, notarized bank statement. It was from an account at a private bank in the Cayman Islands under the name of a shell corporation. The statement was dated 1 week before Amelia and David's wedding. It showed a balance of just over $3 million. David's face, which had been a mask of confident sorrow, lost all its color. He stared at the paper as if it were a snake. Vance, for his part, was momentarily flustered, but he recovered quickly, putting on a show of dismissiveness. "A minor administrative oversight from a decade ago," he blustered. "A family holding account that David had forgotten about. It's hardly material enough to invalidate the entire agreement." Isabella leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing the two men to lean in to hear her. "An administrative oversight of $3 million is a fascinating concept, Arthur. But you and I both know that under the California Family Code, the failure to provide a full, complete, and accurate disclosure of all assets and liabilities prior to the signing of a prenuptial agreement constitutes a material breach. It doesn't matter if it was $1 or $100 million. The act of concealment itself renders the contract void. It's not a loophole. It is the law." The room was silent. David stared at his lawyer, a look of naked panic flashing in his eyes before he could suppress it. He had been so certain of his defenses, so confident in his secrets. He had never imagined they could know about this. And if they knew about this one account, what else did they know? Isabella sat back, her work done. "The prenup is dead," she stated simply. "Therefore, we will be proceeding under the assumption of standard community property laws. We will require a full and complete forensic accounting of all income, assets, and investments acquired by Mr. Miller during the entire course of the marriage. We will, of course, be filing the appropriate motions to ensure full compliance." Vance, red-faced and outmaneuvered, abruptly stood up. "This meeting is over," he snapped, gathering his papers. The retreat was a clear admission of defeat. David, looking rattled, followed him to the door. As he passed Amelia, he leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper. "You have no idea what you're doing, Amelia. You're making a terrible mistake." Amelia did not turn. She did not even flinch. She simply rose from her chair and walked out of the room, following Isabella, leaving David standing alone in the doorway, his first, best line of defense, now a pile of smoldering ash. The storm had not yet broken, but the air had turned electric, and the first, distant rumble of thunder had finally sounded. The weeks following the disastrous first meeting were a chilling affirmation of Isabella's predictions. The Millers, having lost the first battle on legal ground, immediately escalated to Phase 2, the character assassination. The attack was not a frontal assault, but a subtle, creeping poison that seeped into the foundations of Amelia's life. It began with concerned phone calls from friends, their voices laced with a practiced sympathy. "We heard you and David are going through a rough patch," they would say. "He's just so worried about you. He says you haven't been yourself lately." The whispers followed her into the exclusive social and professional circles she inhabited. At a gallery opening, she felt the stares. She heard the hushed conversations that abruptly stopped when she approached. The narrative was being written by the Millers, and in their story, she was the unstable, erratic wife, and David was the long-suffering, devoted husband. Amelia, adhering to Isabella's strict instructions, did not defend herself. She did not correct the rumors. She met every concerned glance and every veiled question with a serene, unshakable calm. Her silence was her shield and her sword. It unnerved them. They had expected tears, angry outbursts, frantic denials, evidence to support their claims of her instability. Instead, they got an architect, a woman of structure and control, who refused to inhabit the emotional chaos they had designed for her. Her refusal to play the victim was, to them, her most infuriating transgression. This all culminated in the deposition, the formal, sworn testimony that would set the stage for the entire case. It was held in a larger, even more imposing conference room, the air thick with the scent of expensive leather and impending doom. A court reporter sat at the head of the table, her fingers poised over her stenotype machine, a silent priestess ready to transcribe the day's confessions and lies into the unbreakable gospel of a legal record. David and Arthur Vance were there, their arrogance restored, their expressions hardened into a mask of righteous indignation. And this time, they had brought their queen. Eleanor Miller sat directly behind her son, a silent, regal presence in a Chanel suit, her posture ramrod straight. She was not there merely as a spectator. She was there as a symbol of the Miller dynasty, a physical manifestation of the power and influence they believed would crush this inconvenient rebellion. Isabella began her questioning of David with a deceptive calm, her voice a low, steady rhythm in the tense room. She started with the basics: his income, his assets, the timeline of his relationship with Clara Monroe. David, clearly well coached by Vance, answered with smooth, plausible deflections. The affair was a terrible mistake, a brief lapse in judgment. The gifts to Clara were discretionary corporate bonuses for a valuable employee. He was a master of corporate jargon and emotional evasion. Eleanor watched with a look of smug approval, a faint, condescending smile playing on her lips. After an hour of this carefully constructed theater, Isabella leaned forward, her tone shifting from inquisitive to incisive. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice cutting through the stale air. "Let's discuss an entity known as the Managed Reserve Account Number 7 on your company's books." Vance immediately objected. "Relevance? This is a marital dispute, not a securities hearing. It is relevant to the disclosure of community property. Counsel," Isabella shot back, not taking her eyes off David. "Mr. Miller, can you tell me the purpose of this account?" David's smooth facade began to show the faintest of cracks. "It's a standard omnibus account," he said, the words sounding rehearsed, "used for balancing trades and managing corporate liquidity." "Is it?" Isabella replied, sliding a thick binder to the center of the table. "Because the internal transfer logs from your own firm, provided to us by a former employee, show a different purpose. They show a consistent pattern, over 5 years, of skimming fractional profits from your clients' portfolios, the Hendersons, the Winstons, the Park family, and diverting those profits into this liquidity account. Could you perhaps explain that?" The room's temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Vance was on his feet, shouting, "This is an outrageous fabrication. My client will not answer questions based on stolen, unsubstantiated documents." The court reporter's fingers flew, capturing every word. David was ashen-faced, his eyes darting from Isabella to his lawyer, his composure shattered. But Isabella wasn't finished. Before Vance could stop her, she pressed on, "And from this same account, Mr. Miller, regular payments were made to a Nevada LLC, the same LLC that happens to own a penthouse in Miami and a Tesla registered to a Miss Clara Monroe. Is it your testimony that embezzling from your clients to finance your mistress's lifestyle is a standard practice at Miller Holdings? The word embezzling hung in the air like poison gas. David stared, speechless. But the final, most devastating blow was yet to come. Isabella paused, letting the chaos settle, her gaze shifting deliberately past David to the woman sitting behind him. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice now dangerously soft, "when you encounter difficulties in your business or personal life, is it your custom to seek the counsel of your mother, Eleanor Miller?" Vance bellowed. "Objection," badgering the witness. "This is harassment." Isabella ignored him. She produced a single sheet of paper. "I'm holding a printout of an email sent from Eleanor Miller's personal account to your own, dated 6 weeks ago. In it, she writes, and I quote for the record, 'You must be ruthless, David. The family's legacy must be protected from the grasping hands of a woman who was never truly one of us.'" Eleanor's regal composure finally broke. A strangled gasp escaped her lips. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury and shock. "A mother's loving advice," Isabella said with cold irony. "But it becomes more than advice, doesn't it?" She produced one final document, placing it on the table with the finality of a death sentence. "This is a bank record from a trust account in your mother's name. It documents a wire transfer of $5 million into the very same Cayman Islands account you failed to disclose on your prenup. A transfer, I might add, that was executed the day after she sent you that email. Checkmate." The room erupted. Vance was shouting. David was a statue of pure panic. But all eyes were on Eleanor Miller. The matriarch, the queen, the untouchable power behind the throne, was now a named co-conspirator in felony-level financial fraud and money laundering. The color drained from her face, replaced by the pallor of raw, primal fear. Her reputation, the only currency she truly valued, was now in ashes. Isabella calmly closed her binder. "I believe we are done for today," she said to the court reporter, her voice cutting through the noise. She stood, and Amelia stood with her. They turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind them the smoking, shattered ruins of the House of Miller. The facade had not just been cracked. It had been utterly and irrevocably demolished. A deposition is not a public trial, but its shockwaves can trigger an earthquake. The transcript of David Miller's testimony, a dry, factual record of his lies, evasions, and eventual, stunning exposure, became a legal document with the destructive power of a bomb. Within 48 hours, the controlled demolition that Amelia and Isabella had so meticulously planned began, and the collapse of the House of Miller was swift, brutal, and absolute. The first pillar to fall was David's professional empire. Arthur Vance, realizing the case had spiraled from a messy divorce into a catastrophic criminal liability, began advising his clients not on how to win, but on how to survive. But the damage was already done. News of the embezzlement allegations, strategically leaked from the periphery of the case, ripped through the city's tight-knit financial community. The story appeared as a small but devastating article in the Wall Street Journal, citing sources close to the investigation. The fallout at Miller Holdings was immediate. The firm's wealthy, image-conscious partners, who had once admired David's aggressive tactics, now saw him as a toxic asset threatening to sink their entire ship. An emergency board meeting was called, one to which David was not invited. He was suspended indefinitely, his nameplate was removed from his office door, and a team of forensic accountants was brought in to assess the damage. Within a week, he was forced into a quiet, humiliating resignation. His photograph vanished from the company website. His career, the source of his power and his identity, had been erased as cleanly as a line of code. Hot on the heels of his professional demise, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, officially launched a formal investigation, freezing all of David's known assets and turning his life into an open book for federal prosecutors to read. The second pillar to crumble was his web of accomplices, and the first to run was Clara Monroe. The life of sun-drenched lunches and illicit weekend getaways came to an abrupt end. Clara found her corporate credit cards canceled and her access to the company car revoked. She was no longer the cherished mistress on the verge of a new life. She was a terrified young woman whose name was on fraudulent corporate documents, facing the very real possibility of being charged as a co-conspirator. Seeing her vulnerability, Isabella made her move. She didn't threaten, she offered a lifeline. A lawyer from her firm contacted Clara's newly hired and very anxious attorney. The offer was simple: full cooperation in exchange for a recommendation of immunity to the SEC. For Clara, it wasn't a choice. Her loyalty to David, a loyalty built on his promises of a future that had just evaporated, was non-existent. She saw now that she had never been his partner. She had been a tool, a convenience, and now a potential scapegoat. In a tearful, multi-hour interview with Isabella's team, she gave them everything. She turned over her personal laptop, revealing a hidden archive of emails David had written from a private account. She gave them the secret phone he used for his most sensitive business dealings. She recounted conversations, verbatim, in which David had bragged about his financial genius, detailing exactly how he outsmarted his dull, wealthy clients. She was no longer a pawn in his game. She was now the prosecution's star witness. The betrayal was absolute, a perfect mirror of the disloyalty he had shown to Amelia. But the final, most devastating betrayal came from the one person David believed was unshakable in her devotion, his mother. Eleanor Miller was a creature of society, and her reputation was her lifeblood. The deposition had made her a pariah. Her friends stopped returning her calls. Her invitations to charity boards and exclusive galas dried up. The Miller name, once a symbol of East Coast prestige, was now synonymous with scandal and fraud. Faced with her own social extinction and the looming threat of criminal charges for conspiracy and money laundering, Eleanor's maternal love was revealed to be nothing more than a form of narcissistic self-preservation. Her lawyers initiated frantic, back-channel negotiations with Isabella. Eleanor, in a desperate bid to save herself, threw her own son to the wolves. She agreed to pay Amelia a staggering financial settlement, a sum that vastly exceeded any potential community property claim, effectively buying her silence in any civil action. In return for this payout, Amelia would agree not to name Eleanor in any further lawsuits. Furthermore, Eleanor's lawyers informed the SEC that she was prepared to cooperate, painting a tragic picture of a concerned mother who had been misled by her brilliant but troubled son, a mother who had only tried to protect the family from what she had been told was a vindictive spouse. She would sacrifice her son on the altar of her own reputation. And so, David Miller was left with nothing. His career was a ruin. His fortune was frozen by the government. His mistress had become his chief accuser. His mother, his lifelong enabler and co-conspirator, had abandoned him to save herself. The lawsuits from his defrauded clients began to pile up, each one a nail in his financial coffin. He was forced to sell his cars, his watches, his entire collection of expensive toys to pay the mounting legal bills for a defense that looked increasingly hopeless. The golden boy of San Francisco finance was now a pariah, a haggard man living in a rented condo, his days spent not in boardrooms, but in tense, hopeless meetings with his criminal defense attorneys. The day the settlement from Eleanor was finalized, Isabella called Amelia. There was no celebration in her voice, only a quiet, professional finality. The war was over. The demolition was complete. Amelia sat in her office, looking out at the city skyline, at the solid, honest structures reaching for the sky. She felt no joy, no thrill of victory. She felt only the profound, quiet relief of a great weight being lifted. It was the feeling of a storm having passed, leaving behind a clean, clear, and silent world. Justice had not been a fiery, passionate affair. It had been a meticulous, patient, and ruthless deconstruction. And in the end, it had been served. The final signing took place on a cool, clear afternoon in Isabella's office, the same room where the unlikeliest of alliances had been forged months earlier. The city sprawled below, indifferent and beautiful. The war was over, the treaties signed, the enemy vanquished. Eleanor's settlement had been transferred, a sum so vast it was almost abstract, a silent, hefty apology written in wire transfers. Amelia signed the last document with a steady hand. There was no elation, no triumphant surge of adrenaline. There was only a profound and heavy quiet, the kind of silence that fills a space after a controlled demolition. When the dust has settled and the sky is visible once more through the space where a flawed structure used to stand, she was free. She was financially secure beyond her wildest dreams. But the victory felt somber, a testament to a loss so profound it could never be truly quantified. She looked across the desk at Isabella, the woman who had been her general, her strategist, and her unexpected confidant. "I could never have done this without you," Amelia said. The words simple, but imbued with a weight of gratitude that went far beyond a client-lawyer relationship. "You gave me my life back." Isabella offered a rare, small smile. It did not quite reach her eyes, which still held the measured watchfulness of a born survivor. "You were the one who had to live behind enemy lines, Amelia. You were the stronger soldier. I just drew the map." She gathered the signed papers into a neat stack, her movements precise, final. The business between them was concluded. As Amelia stood to leave, ready to step out into her new, unwritten future, Isabella held up a hand. "There is one last thing," she said, her voice softer than Amelia had ever heard it. "This isn't a legal document. It's not part of the case. It is simply a loose end, a piece of the truth that I believe you are now owed." She paused, then slid a single, slim manila folder across the vast, polished desk. It seemed insignificant compared to the mountains of evidence they had compiled, yet the gravity of the gesture held Amelia in place. Puzzled, Amelia sat back down and opened it. Inside was not a financial statement or a legal brief, but a single, pristine copy of a birth certificate from the state of Oregon. Her eyes scanned the details. A boy, born 5 years ago. She didn't recognize the mother's name. And then, her gaze fell upon the space designated for the father. The name typed there was David Miller. Amelia's mind reeled, trying to process the information. The date of birth was the critical, damning fact. This child had been born while David was still married to Isabella. She looked up, a silent question in her eyes. Isabella's expression was somber, her voice devoid of any lingering bitterness, speaking only to the cold, hard facts. "He had an affair during our marriage," she explained quietly. "With a woman he worked with on a project in Portland. When she became pregnant, he convinced her he would leave me. He never did. Once the child was born, he cut them off completely, providing only a small, anonymous cash allowance funneled through one of his shell companies, just enough to ensure their silence." Amelia was speechless, the final, missing piece of the puzzle of David's depravity slotting into place. "Did you know?" she finally managed to whisper. "During your divorce?" "Yes," Isabella said. "I found out near the end. My investigator uncovered it." "Why didn't you use it?" Amelia asked, her mind racing. "This would have destroyed him. You could have won everything." Isabella leaned back, her gaze drifting toward the window, toward the distant, unblinking city. "Because the child is innocent," she said, her voice firm with a conviction that was absolute. To use his existence as a weapon would have meant dragging him and his mother into the public spectacle of our divorce. It would have marked him for life. David's crime against me was one of greed and betrayal. His crime against that child was something far worse. Some weapons are too cruel to be used, no matter how just the war. She had held the ultimate trump card, a checkmate move of such devastating power, and she had chosen not to play it, not out of weakness, but out of a profound and startling sense of moral clarity. She was not just an architect of justice, she was its guardian. In that moment, Amelia's perception of the woman before her shifted entirely. She was not just a brilliant, vengeful lawyer forged in the fires of her own betrayal. She was a woman of immense, hidden strength, who had drawn a line in the sand that even her own pain would not allow her to cross. She had waited, holding on to this terrible secret, not to deploy it for her own gain, but to understand the true measure of the man who had wronged them both. She was giving this knowledge to Amelia now, not as a final blow to a defeated enemy, but as a gift of absolute truth, a final closing of a dark and twisted chapter. Amelia left the building and stepped into the late afternoon sun. The city hummed around her, a symphony of lives moving forward. She was finally, truly free. Not just from a marriage, but from the last lingering shadow of a man she now understood completely. He was not just a liar, a cheat, a thief. He was a hollow man, capable of the deepest and most casual cruelties. There is a lesson in stories like this, a quiet and powerful truth. Never mistake the silence of those who have endured for weakness. The world is full of people who will miscalculate, who believe that the quiet, dignified woman is a victim in the making. They do not understand that such silence is not empty. It is a space where strength is gathered, where resolve is forged, and where plans are meticulously laid. For when a person who has been pushed too far finally decides to act, they do not merely create waves. They unleash a tsunami, perfectly designed and utterly unstoppable. The tale of Amelia and Isabella is over, but the intricate architecture of family deception is a design that is never truly finished. Join us next time as we unravel the story of a mysterious last will and testament, a document that ignites a savage and unforgiving war between siblings who share the same blood, but not the same secrets.